So have you had situations where you had to delegate a task to one of your team members or perhaps one of your subordinates, but you later regretted it? Maybe the delegation wasn't done properly, or maybe you chose the wrong person, whatever might have happened. But often leaders struggle with the task of delegation simply because many a times they're clueless about how to delegate, what to delegate, whom to delegate, and so on. So we're going to talk about two essential forms of delegation that you need to look forward to and how we can actually use this in our context. Okay. So these two types of delegation that I'm going to talk to you about are inspired, or rather adapted, from the very famous book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, written by none other than the legendary guru of management, Dr. Stephen Covey. So let's try and understand what is it that you need to understand in the context of delegation. What are the forms or types of delegation that we need to look at? So there are two predominant types of delegation that Dr. Stephen Covey talks about. One of them is Gopher delegation, and the other is Stewardship delegation. So let me talk to you a bit about both of these, and then we'll focus deeply into what is exactly Stewardship delegation. So Gopher delegation is actually, in a sense, not really the delegation that you want to do, but some tasks can be delegated this way. So in Gopher delegation, you basically tell the person, go for this, go for that, do this, do that. Basically, you're giving every direction to the person who is intended to do the task. So in a sense, although you're delegating, you are still in charge because you're telling the other person exactly what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, what should not be done, and so on and so forth. So you are always in control, right? And therefore, it's called Gopher delegation. So the term Gopher actually comes from go for this, go for that, and that's why the term Gopher delegation. So is Gopher delegation wrong? Not necessarily, but it can be used for some specific tasks or situations. For example, if you have a newcomer in the team who does not have an idea about how to do a certain task, then perhaps in that case, you could direct the person and tell the person of what needs to be done and what should not be done, how it needs to be done, what is the method that you want him or her to adopt, and so on and so forth. But there are limitations to it because you're driving the entire show on your own. And in a sense, you might also be interfering with the way the person wants to do the task. Whereas real delegation happens when you do stewardship delegation. Now, what is stewardship delegation? So stewardship delegation is the one that focuses on the results of delegation, not on the methods. So let me give you an example. Suppose there is a team member or a subordinate in your team to whom you have asked to perhaps build a presentation for the management review. Okay. Now you've given inputs on what needs to be done, and that's pretty much about it. You've left it completely to the imagination of your subordinate to build this PowerPoint presentation. So at the end of it, the person walks back to you with the entire presentation. You take a look at it, you make some corrections if necessary, and that's pretty much about it. So your interference, your involvement in the entire process was zero, zilch, which means you give complete autonomy to the person who is entrusted with the responsibility of completing that particular task. And that is what is a great thing about stewardship delegation, is that the focus is always on what you achieve or accomplish at the end of it, not so much about the methods. The method is something that the delegatee himself or herself decides depending on the task that has been delegated. So your headache is confined only to delegating the task. You don't have to worry, you don't have to interfere with regards to how it is being done by the person to whom the task has been delegated. And that's why I think stewardship delegation makes a lot of sense. Of course, for you to build people or for you to have people in your team who are worthy of completing a task at this level, you need to groom them. But once you groom them, you got to trust them and you got to give them complete freedom so that they can choose their own method in terms of completion of that task. There are 5 important elements, though, with regards to stewardship delegation, and that is precisely what we're going to talk about. So these are 5 things that one must remember in the context of stewardship delegation. So what are the 5 things that you must do when you're delegating a task in this particular way? So the first thing that you discuss is about the results that are anticipated. So when you delegate a task, of course, there are results that you're expecting. So both of you, that is the person delegating the task and the person to whom the task is being delegated, both of you need to arrive at commonality in terms of what will the result look like. Sometimes the expectation that you have as a leader and the understanding that the delegatee has could be completely different, right? So it's important for you to have a conversation and tell the other person, when I say this task is completed, it means we would have achieved A, B, and C. It's important for you to clarify that. So spend time right at the outset explaining the other person what would result achievement look like. Otherwise, it often leads to unnecessary frustration at the end of it, at both the ends, and therefore delegation might fail. So arriving at a commonality, understanding what would successful accomplishment of the result look like is a very, very critical step right at the outset that you need to focus in the context of stewardship delegation. The second thing that you need to talk about is what are the guidelines, what are the set boundaries within which the other person needs to operate in. Okay, so what is it that he or she can do? What is it that he or she cannot do? So there has to be a boundary that needs to be created. Now, why is this necessary? Because sometimes when you give freedom, people might misuse freedom and they might do things that they feel is correct, but that might not be within the compliance norms of the organization. So you've got to also tell the other person that, look, when you're doing a particular task, you have to remember that this is your boundary. You can't go beyond this. It could be in terms of financial budgets, or it could be in terms of the authority the other person has in the context of dealing with other team members. Whatever the case might be, you have to talk about the guidelines within which the task needs to be accomplished. Very, very important. Otherwise, you can be taken for a ride and things might go completely haywire. So always be careful with the guidelines. Number 3, it's important that when you delegate a task, you also provide the other person with the resources to complete that task. Now, the resources could be, let's say, if there is a task that needs to be completed, then I might require other people's support. So is there manpower support that you're allowing the other person to tap into? Sometimes it could require financial support. Sometimes it could require skill-based support. So for example, you might have to train a particular person before you delegate a certain task to him or her. So what are the kind of resources that he or she would have at his disposal in order to accomplish the desired results? Remember, only giving people responsibility without giving them authority would mean absolutely nothing. And such delegations often fail and will continue to fail. So very, very important for us to understand that the required resources are being provided to the concerned person so that he or she can do complete justice to the task at hand. Number 4, you got to set accountability. You got to make sure that the other person takes complete accountability for the task, which means he or she would take all the necessary actions to ensure that the task is completed. Okay, it's important for the other person to know that if a task is not completed, then perhaps it's a failure for both of us, the person delegating as well as the person to whom the task has been delegated. Now, for you to provide this accountability to the other person, it's important for you to have this conversation and say that, look, I'm depending on you for this task. The reason I'm giving you this task is because I trust you. I know you have the competence, but it's also about proving the fact that you're capable enough to handle such tasks in the future. So ensure that the other person has taken complete accountability. Of course, the ultimate accountability is with you being the person who has delegated the task, but you want the other person to also demonstrate accountability in his or her actions when it comes to achieving the desired results. And therefore, the final thing that you talk about are the consequences. What happens if this particular task is not completed? Okay, what is the flip side of it? Why is it important for us to achieve it? And if you don't achieve it, then what do we stand to lose in the bargain? Why is consequences important? Because you want the other person to take the task seriously, right? So it's important for us to talk about both the stick and the carrot. What do we stand to gain when we achieve this? What do we stand to lose in case we don't achieve it? So I think a balance of both is absolutely critical for you to talk about as a leader. So those are the 5 important elements that you follow in the context of stewardship delegation. Let me run you through those again. The first thing that you do is to talk about what is the desired result. And remember, both of you need to be on the same page in the context of the desired result. Number two, the guidelines, the boundaries within which one needs to operate. Number three, what are the resources that will be provided to the concerned person in order to complete the task? Number four, you're going to talk about accountability. The person needs to take complete accountability for the task because you're dependent on him or her and his or her expertise to complete it. And finally, what are the consequences in case the task is achieved, in case the task is not achieved? What is at stake needs to be discussed completely. Once you do these 5 elements, then you'll be in a much, much better position to ensure that the delegated task is completed on time and with the desired quality as well. So try this the next time whenever you're delegating a task to one of your subordinates. Perhaps it might be a good idea to start with a smaller task and then mature to the next level as you see more and more results coming your way. So delegation is a modern day reality. And no matter who you are, which organization you operate into, it's important for us to understand that without delegation, you can't sustain for a long duration. So we can't escape delegation, and therefore it's important for us to learn the tricks of the trade and delegate effectively and the right way at all times. Try this and do let me know what results you achieve from this.